June 1941. Behind British lines in the Western Desert, Allied mechanics test-fired standard rifles at a captured German Sd.Kfz 222 light reconnaissance vehicle, only to watch the rounds punch clean through the sides. The 8 millimeters of sloped steel, which German propaganda marketed as battlefield protection, was defeated by armor-piercing rifle ammunition. The formidable-looking vehicle, with its distinctive diamond-shaped profile and 20mm autocannon, had a critical vulnerability. German crews trusted their machines, believing the armor would protect them. They did not know that British infantrymen, equipped with Lee-Enfield rifles and armor-piercing rounds, could kill them at ranges over 150 meters. The Sd.Kfz 222 was a product of the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, which forbade tank production but allowed armored cars in a legal gray area. Built by the Reichswehr and later the Wehrmacht, these armored cars were intended for reconnaissance and security. Developed throughout the mid-1930s, the design prioritized speed and mobility over heavy protection, based on the doctrine that reconnaissance units would observe from a distance rather than engage in sustained combat. The final vehicle, built on a modified Horch 801 chassis, featured sophisticated engineering, including four-wheel drive and four-wheel steering for tight maneuvers. Production began in 1937. The angular armor plates were a deliberate design choice, intended to maximize the effectiveness of the thin steel through sloping and deflection. The open-topped turret, protected by wire mesh against hand grenades, provided good visibility but kept the vehicle's weight manageable. Armament initially included the 20mm Kwk-30 autocannon and a 7.92mm machine gun, later upgraded to the MG-34 and the faster-firing Kwk-38 autocannon in 1942. The three-man crew operated in cramped conditions, but they appreciated the vehicle's mechanical reliability and the adequate power from the Horch E8 engine, which ranged from 75 to 90 horsepower depending on the variant. The fundamental weakness was the armor. Early 1938 production vehicles had 8 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor on all surfaces. This thickness, about that of 4 stacked credit cards, was designed only to stop pistol rounds, submachine gun fire, and shrapnel. It could deflect glancing rifle shots, but was entirely inadequate against armor-piercing rifle ammunition fired at close, perpendicular angles. German engineers acknowledged this flaw. Beginning in 1939, they increased frontal armor to 14.5 millimeters, and later variants from 1942 featured 30 millimeters in the front. However, thousands of earlier minimally protected vehicles remained in service, and even the improved models kept the vulnerable 8mm side armor. The bottom and rear deck had even thinner 5mm armor. German military planners had made a calculated decision that speed would compensate for the limited protection. German propaganda reinforced this by emphasizing the sloped armor's ability to deflect fire, fostering a psychological effect that encouraged crews to trust their equipment. This optimistic assumption was shattered by the reality of World War II combat. The vehicle performed admirably in Poland, France, and the Balkans against disorganized forces with outdated weapons or limited armor-piercing ammunition. These early successes validated German confidence until the Africa campaign began. The Africa Corps arrived in Libya in February 1941. Equipped with Sd.Kfz 222s, reconnaissance units immediately deployed into the desert. The desert presented unique challenges: vast open spaces, extreme temperatures, and abrasive sand. The terrain allowed the vehicle's speed and visibility to be exploited, but the lack of cover meant they had nowhere to hide once spotted, and the distances stretched their limited fuel capacity. The 222 initially performed well, using its speed for hit-and-run reconnaissance missions against the outmaneuvered British forces. However, the British forces were well equipped with modern weapons, including rifles loaded with armor-piercing ammunition. The fluid desert warfare quickly led to captured German vehicles, especially during Operation Crusader in November 1941. Field testing by 8th Army mechanics revealed the truth about the armor. After confirming that the 8mm armor could stop 9mm pistol and submachine gun fire, a Lee-Enfield rifle, loaded with the W Mark I armor-piercing round, was tested. This round, which featured a hardened steel core and was designed to penetrate light armor, consistently punched clean through the 8mm side armor at ranges under 100 yards with perpendicular hits. The hole on the interior was jagged and larger, with metal fragments. The intelligence spread rapidly through Allied armies. British infantry learned they no longer needed anti-tank guns to engage the Sd.Kfz 222. A rifleman with the appropriate ammunition could kill them at ranges over 150 meters. Soviet forces made their own discoveries. A captured Sd.Kfz 222 was examined by engineers at the Gaz factory near Moscow in September 1941. While impressed by the highly faceted and angled armor design, Soviet engineers learned from the German mistakes. The resulting BA-64 light armored car, which entered production in April 1942, adopted the multifaceted angled hull but featured a slightly thicker 9mm side armor. More importantly, Soviet designers prioritized mass production and economy, accepting the vehicle's fundamental vulnerability to modern anti-tank weapons. Over 9,110 BA-64 variants were built, dwarfing the fewer than 1,000 Sd.Kfz 222s manufactured.
British forces, meanwhile, developed the Daimler and Humber armored cars, which featured significantly better protection, with the Daimler having 16mm on the sides and 30mm on the front, offering genuine defense against rifle fire. The contrast highlighted different national design philosophies. Germany prioritized speed, Britain prioritized firepower and protection, and the Soviet Union prioritized mass production. American forces conducted their own systematic ballistics tests in late 1942. The M2 armor-piercing round for the M1903 Springfield and M1 Garand rifles, designed to defeat light armor, was documented to penetrate up to 12.7mm at 100 yards, significantly exceeding the 8mm side armor. American infantry could engage the German armored cars with confidence using the M2 ammunition. The tests also confirmed the 8mm armor worked against submachine guns and carbines, demonstrating the critical distinction between standard ball ammunition and hardened core armor-piercing rounds. The angular design of the Sd.Kfz 222 maximized obliquity to encourage ricochets, a feature German engineers relied upon. However, in fluid combat, armored cars often presented perpendicular or near-perpendicular surfaces to enemy fire, especially on the flat sides where the 8mm armor was most vulnerable. By late 1942, the vulnerability of the Sd.Kfz 222 was well documented across all theaters. The vehicle, which performed well against the older military technology of the late 1930s, had become a fatal liability by 1943. German military leadership recognized the problem by early 1942, driven by combat reports from Africa and Russia. The response was the development of the 8-wheeled Sd.Kfz 234 series, known as the Puma. The Puma finally provided genuine protection, with 30mm of frontal armor and 14.5mm on the sides, along with a 50mm KWK-39 L/60 gun, giving it genuine anti-tank capability. However, development and production delays meant the first Pumas did not reach frontline units until late 1943. Only about 400 total Pumas were built before production ceased in late 1944. This small number could not possibly replace the hundreds of older, vulnerable Sd.Kfz 222s still in service. The Sd.Kfz 222's production ended in late 1943 after approximately 990 vehicles had been manufactured. Even the latest variants, like the 1942 AB model with 30mm frontal armor and a 90-horsepower engine, retained the vulnerable 8mm side armor. Consequently, many 222s were relegated to rear area security, training, and anti-partisan operations where the threat was less severe. The Sd.Kfz 222's historical significance lies not in its combat effectiveness, but in what it reveals about military design compromises. It was fast, reliable, and well-armed for reconnaissance, but failed in the one critical area for crew survival: protection. A small increase to 12 or 15mm of side armor would have made it significantly more survivable, but German designers chose not to add the weight and cost. the calculated risk that speed and mobility would compensate for limited protection, and the assumption that reconnaissance vehicles would avoid close combat proved to be a lethal miscalculation. The open-top turret also left the crew exposed to grenades and artillery airbursts, and the cramped interior meant a single penetrating round was likely to cause multiple casualties. Furthermore, the thin armor could not protect against a loss of mobility. The tires were vulnerable to gunfire, and an immobilized vehicle was a sitting target. Despite its known flaws, the Sd.Kfz 222 remained in service throughout the war because Germany lacked sufficient replacement vehicles. German crews continued their dangerous reconnaissance work, demonstrating bravery even with inadequate equipment. The story of the Sd.Kfz 222 is a cautionary tale, illustrating how design compromises, though sound in theory in peacetime, can have lethal consequences when weapon technology evolves and enemies adapt. It also highlights the critical importance of battlefield intelligence. The rapid sharing of knowledge about the vehicle's vulnerability among British, Commonwealth, Soviet, and American forces provided infantry with effective countermeasures, preventing unnecessary casualties and increasing confidence. The 8 millimeters of steel, once thought to be sufficient, was barely adequate against the lightest weapons and completely inadequate against armor-piercing rifle ammunition. When Allied mechanics in the desert discovered a standard rifle could penetrate the Sd.Kfz 222, they revealed a critical vulnerability that fundamentally changed how Allied soldiers approached the German reconnaissance vehicle. It was no longer feared for its armor, but known as a vulnerable target, a vehicle with thin armor that could be defeated by infantry weapons.